the Army Air Force was separated and became the Air Force, a separate branch of service, and that the OSS, which was the Office of Special Services, was disbanded and eventually became the CIA. So that here was a major military organization and a major intelligence organization totally in disarray, new-founded, didn't know what they were doing after World War II, and not really reorganized yet. And as a result of that, the President Truman at that time convened a very high-level committee to examine this alien or UFO phenomenon.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. They
did come to the conclusion that it was alien, and the military rightly came to the conclusion, if they're hostile, there's nothing we can do about it. Therefore, their choice was to deny it and to hush it up and create the National Security Act of 1947, which validated that deception and covered it up and allowed the group to go underground, as it were. And we've been living with that now for 50 years. It is really the beginning of the whole cover-up, the entire denial of this phenomenon. And the addition of dismissal, disinformation, misinformation to cloak and to discourage investigation, to misinform. It's just been continuous for many, many years now.
They caused such panic that President Truman was forced to speak about them publicly. In a few short years, UFOs had reached the highest office in the land.
Oh yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know, if I'm not mistaken.
Not only do the technologies have enormous implications for the geopolitical elite, shall we call them, but I think that also there's been a long-term plan that was hatched in the 50s that Eisenhower lost control of, quite frankly. And I have had confirmed to me by the Ministry of Defense of a foreign government that Eisenhower did have a meeting with extraterrestrial life forms in 1954 near what's now Edwards Air Force Base, Muroc. Basically, it was a meeting. There was a landed craft and extraterrestrial beings. Eisenhower was there. He was in favor of disclosing that event and the presence to the public, but the people around him that were tied into the financial and corporate and contracting sector really said you cannot do it, and I think he lived to regret it. And his swan song when he left office, Eisenhower said, "Beware the military-industrial complex."
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Just like George Washington gave his warnings about foreign entanglements and things like that, my dad was giving his warning against letting this military-industrial complex get out of hand.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
How have these projects worked? Some years ago, a military advisor of mine explained to me something called an Unacknowledged Special Access Project, or USAP. This is a project which, while compartmented and which requires special access, is also unacknowledged. And what that means is that no one outside of that compartmented area of operation is told about it. And it doesn't matter if the person is the President of the United States, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
A very good article on the black budget process by this gentleman, Bill Sweetman, who's he's not really a UFO guy, he's an aviation aerospace guy, did a really good article about 10 years ago on what are known as special access programs, and these are the prototypical black budget programs. At the time, his estimate, there's almost no public literature that really investigates the black budget process. Sweetman did a pretty good job. His estimate at the time was that there were about 150 special access programs. And the real interesting thing about them, one is that he had no idea how they got all their money. But what he was able to determine is that there was little to no oversight by Congress anyway. And they had their own sort of independent, unique classification system. So if I were the manager of one special access program, I would create my system, and I would say, you're in, you're out. You have 4 stars, doesn't matter, you're out. You I grew up with, I know you, I trust you, you're in. And that's how that would work, according to what Sweetman learned. And the key thing was that in his analysis, they weren't dominated by the Pentagon personnel. They were not dominated by U.S. military people. The special access programs were dominated by the contractors, by General Electric and Lockheed and Boeing and those guys. They were in charge. And that the DOD liaisons were basically, as he could see it, gatekeepers for money, for funding, and that was basically it.
A government is widespread, as everybody knows. I mean, it's into everybody's pockets and everybody's life all over the place, and the same thing holds true for the UFO extraterrestrial, if you want to look at it that way. But very, very few people really know the full knowledge of what's going on. It's held very tightly within black covert operations. They keep pretty much each organization an island unto itself. You don't have cross-departmentalization a lot within the programs. TRW, Johnson Controls, Honeywell, all of them at some point or another became involved with the intelligence field, certain works, some of Phil Corso's early back engineering projects. If you will look into those, Atlantic Research was one of them, way back. Entities that were created out of people in the Pentagon to become a quote-unquote Beltway bandit. Received projects, grants, and monies to do certain projects that were so highly classified, even though there was only a top secret, but so compartmentalized that only about 4 people would know what was going on. But as far as UFO and intelligence and extraterrestrial goes, it's right at the top. And I would say that the president has such limited knowledge of it. I know Carter did not have any knowledge whatsoever. And I worked right there with the organization, President Carter's organization.
There's about 38 levels above top secret. The highest is cosmic. That's, okay, I'll tell you right now, that's UFOs, aliens, and particleization. Now, like you heard a while ago, there's only probably about 25 people in the world that know things that are known at that level. No president has had that level, has ever been cleared for that level. Eisenhower was the closest. One that did not exist, it was so secret, was the NRO. You couldn't mention NRO. The National Reconnaissance Organization.
Depending on the level of the compartmentalization and the secrecy level, you have to go through a fairly significant background check. It takes between 6 months to a year to get the background checks. And then when you do that, then you generally, if you're in a very tight compartment, then you have to sign a statement that you will not divulge the existence of the project or even answer a question that could divulge the existence of the project. And it's not even on a need-to-know basis, it's on a basis of people being identified specifically to know what you're working on and are directly associated with the project. If you have a covert project, the funding would come through a number of government sources, none of which would be identified to the workers.